All right, welcome everybody. Thanks for tuning into this. We are going to be talking pay-per-click today. Just talking about some basics, running it, what it takes, what it's really all about. At the end of the presentation, if you have any questions, you can always direct them over to us here at Genesis Marketing Group, whether it's myself, or Anthony Brown, or Mike Stiers. We're going to be covering sort of an overview of pay-per-click on various platforms, and just kind of what to look out for, some tips and tricks on if you were to manage it yourself or if someone else was managing it for you, what to pay attention to. So we'll kind of hop right in here. I'm going to start with just an overview. This may be, sort of review for some of you. A lot of this may be information that you're already aware of, but some of you watching might not be very knowledgeable about pay-per-click, so that's really what this first bit is going to be for, just to kind of give you an overview of how this works and what we're talking about here. So pay-per-click in a general sense is an auction-based advertising method. So basically the platforms like Google and Bing that offer pay-per-click on sort of a search basis, as a keyword is entered by a user, the platform is going to do a calculation to determine what it would cost for the business if a user clicks on that ad. So for example, if somebody searches basement waterproofing near me and there are, say, 4 competitors bidding on that keyword, the platform, whether it's Google or Bing, is going to look at 2 main factors. Number one, what the advertiser is willing to bid on that keyword, what they're willing to pay for that click, combined with the quality of their ad, the quality of their campaign, how well everything is structured, and just how well everything's run. So basically, if you do a better job of managing your campaigns, then you get a little bit of a break on what your cost per click is, because Google will then see your advertising efforts as a little bit more relevant to the user, and at the end of the day, their goal is to put relevant information in front of the users that are searching. There's a lot more to it than that, but that's the basic idea. So each time that ad is being clicked on, the account is getting charged for that. And the cost per click varies across industries. Some cost per clicks can be as low as 20 cents, 30 cents on a display campaign, for example, all the way up to $80, $90, $100 for highly competitive areas such as anything in legal or insurance. So the idea behind this type of advertising is more targeted towards the bottom of the consumer funnel. So the idea is to drive leads and conversions. So your typical forms of advertising that you might be used to, or the traditional forms of putting highly visual ads out there to get the brand out there, those are generally more top funnel ads. And what we mean by that is to say that you're putting the brand in front of a user perhaps before they actually need the service or the product, and you're really just trying to raise awareness and get the brand solidified in a user or consumer's mind ahead of time. This type of advertising, on the other hand, is really meant to meet a demand that exists right in that moment. So again, back to our example, if a user is searching basement waterproofing near me or basement waterproofing company near me, they are towards the bottom of that funnel. They're ready to get some more information and possibly convert. They've probably already noticed that they have a problem in their home. Maybe they've done a little research already, and the type of search term that they're using indicates that they're more than likely going to be reaching out via phone call or form fill within the next few days to take the next step and actually, having that service performed. So the idea here is to capitalize on that traffic as it's happening and make sure that you get your foot in the door before a competitor does. So when we're talking about driving leads and quote-unquote conversions, we should sort of specify exactly what this lead means. So as far as how we track leads at Genesis and how I see leads and conversions when I run campaigns, to me, something that is a conversion or a lead is something that's concrete. So that's either going to be a phone call, a form fill on a website, or sometimes maybe a chat interaction, but usually it's going to be a form fill or phone call, something that is a concrete interaction between a consumer and a business. So that process, if you look at it from beginning to end, the user is going to search for the product or service that they are in need of. They're going to be served several ads by several competitors. And then when they see the ad that is the most relevant to them, or in some cases the first one that they see in general, they're going to click on that ad. They're going to get to the website, and it is now the website's job to convert that user. It needs to be easy to convert, it needs to have the right information there, and instill confidence in that user that this is going to be the solution to their problem. So then they take the next step, which might be a phone call or a form fill. This could happen in this moment, or they might come back to the website later. And then from there, we should make it very clear that there has to be a system in place to then follow up on that lead from the business end. So the consumer picks up that phone, or they fill out the email. Then it's on the business to make sure that they're capturing that lead and following up, and actually hopefully setting that appointment or whatever that process may be. So it's very important to make sure that those leads are being captured, followed up on in a timely manner. Harvard Business Review actually did a study on this. There's been a few different studies on the turnaround time for leads and how that can impact a business. Again, we're talking about call, text, or emails. I'm not going to go through this whole thing word for word, but basically it's extremely important to make sure that you're turning around on that lead that comes through very quickly, at least within a day. But if you can do it within an hour, that would really be ideal. So if they leave a voicemail or they send in an email, you want to make sure that you're having your customer service rep follow up on that quickly, and get them in touch with whoever's going to be seeing them through the rest of the process with the interaction with the business, whether that's a service or selling a product or whatever it might be. So there are a few pros and cons to this type of advertising. We've kind of alluded to some of the pros, but one of the biggest things is that it's a lot more trackable in terms of ROI and consumer behavior and how they're interacting with your ads. The nice thing about digital is it's all being based on what the user is doing almost in real time. So if a user clicks an ad, we know that that ad got clicked on. We know how many times an ad was clicked. We know how many times an ad was viewed. And then by extension, how many conversions are directly related to those ads. And indirectly related to those ads, which we'll get into a little bit later. So it gives you an immense amount of control over how you manage your online advertising. If you've got certain keywords that are performing well, then you want to put more dollars behind those because they have a heavier ROI than other keywords or campaigns. And then conversely, if you've got campaigns or keywords that are underperforming, you can back those off a little bit. You might not be willing to bid as much on those keywords because they historically do not have as much of a return. So this puts a lot of power in the hands of the advertiser because you have much more reliable data to work with than some of your more traditional forms of advertising, such as out of home or radio or billboards. Not that those forms of advertising don't have a seat at the table. They're certainly very important. But short of simply asking a consumer, how did you hear about us, which we know based on studies before is it has kind of mixed results as far as how reliable that information is. This is a lot more direct. Whether the consumer remembers where they saw you or not, if they interacted with you digitally, this is going to be able to track it. And to that point, since so much interaction now happens digitally, this is a massive benefit because you're actually interacting with users and potential consumers in the way that they are trying to find their businesses. So this is up to date with how people are behaving now. It's very different than it was 10, 20 years ago, even 5 years ago. If you're in need of a product or service now, what do? You pick up your smartphone or your tablet or your computer or all three at different stages throughout the buying cycle, and you search for that product or service. So if you're not in that competitive landscape and your competitors are, then you're certainly leaving money on the table. So it should at least be some sort of element of your marketing mix. Now, there are some drawbacks to it. Number one, because it is a cost per click based advertising, it can be very easy to run up a high bill and not see anything in return if it's not being properly managed. So it's very important that your conversion tracking is all set up and locked down airtight so you know what's actually happening on the platform, whether it's Google or Bing. It's very important to know how these systems work, how the algorithms work, so that you can properly manage your bids There's a lot of different bid management strategies out there. Google has some automated ones now, but you have to have a good knowledge of the underlying mechanism that those work on in order to properly manage them. Otherwise, if things aren't set up properly, like I said, you can go through a lot of budget very quickly in a very inefficient manner. The other drawback to this is while it is extremely effective and it's necessary as part of the marketing mix, it is not the end-all be-all. If you're experiencing less than desirable results in other forms of marketing, this is not something that's just going to replace those and magically make all the problems go away, but it is a type of advertising that should be introduced to the mix. Relying completely on pay-per-click in most circumstances is usually not very advisable. While it does drive a lot of traffic and in some cases is responsible for the greatest portion of leads from a paid standpoint, it is certainly not the only way to get there. So we're going to talk about that a little bit more in this next section here, which is sort of the role of PPC in your entire marketing mix. And the role of PPC as far as a diversified marketing portfolio. So just as a point of illustration, I grabbed this from a client's Google Analytics account over a 6-month window. So if you're not familiar, Google Analytics is a free platform. It allows for you to track activity on your website, where users are coming from, what they're doing once they're there, as far as how long they spend on pages, etc. For us in the PPC world, one of the most important things is knowing where the user came from and whether they converted or not. So what we're looking at is a list of various pathways that users took over this 6-month period before they actually converted on the site. So you'll see number 1, it says paid search. These are users that interacted with a paid advertisement on a Google or Bing platform and converted within that first interaction. So they clicked on the ad, they got to the website, they picked up the phone, or they submitted their contact form. That happened, in this case, about 37% of the time. We usually see that sort of in that range. There are certainly many users who click on a paid advertisement and they convert right away. However, there are certainly a lot more users who either come in through a different channel or through multiple channels. So if you look down at, say, number 6, direct times 2, that means a user came to the site directly, and then they came back again, and then they converted. So it wasn't the first interaction. If you look at the one below that, paid search times 2, this means they clicked on an ad, but at that point, they were not ready to convert. They searched again later, clicked on the ad, came through again, and then they converted. If you look at the one below that, the first interaction was paid search. The second interaction was direct. So this one we see happen a lot. They search for something they're not super familiar with. They click on a paid advertisement, takes them to the site, they get some information. But maybe at the time they did that, they were waiting in line at Starbucks. They were sitting on their couch at home. Maybe they needed to consult with someone else before they actually reached out for that estimate or that interaction or whatever it is. So they come back to the site later directly because that URL is already saved in their phone, and then they convert. So it took them 2 steps. So the bottom line here is that it takes more than one interaction on average for a user to actually convert. And if you don't get your foot in the door with that paid search element, then you're certainly losing opportunities because if they don't click on your ad, there's a good chance they're clicking on someone else's ad, and then they're in that purchase path for a competitor. So I pulled 2 quick stats here, and I just want to point out that on average for this particular client in this window, it took an average of 2 interactions for the user to convert. Now, if you notice, paid search accounted for a good portion of these, and it's kind of skewing those results. So if you just take out the first line, paid search, single interaction conversions, then that changes the average path length quite a bit and gives us a little bit more accurate picture. On average, users interacting through about 4 different channels, whether that's paid search or direct or organic traffic or referral. So this is all just to illustrate the point that paid search and PPC advertising, while it's extremely valuable, is part of a bigger picture and should be viewed that way when evaluating its results after giving it a 3-month, 6-month, year trial if you've never done this before, or when you are managing an ongoing set of campaigns and looking at your return on those campaigns. If you're not showing any conversions, maybe you need to dig a little bit deeper and see if it's contributing to the overall path, because then we can get into more of those details, and you can do some research on like what an assisted conversion is, or different pathways users can take. But it's all part of evaluating performance. So switching gears a little bit, we're going to talk about what it takes to actually be in this game. PPC budgeting is kind of a complicated issue. No budget is one size fits all. It depends on obviously what budget is available to put towards it, what your return on ad spend or return on investment goals are, what the service area is, what kind of services or products you might be offering. There's a lot of variables involved. On average, though, small to medium-sized businesses are usually about in this $9,000 to $11,000 per month advertising budget for PPC. It probably sounds like a lot, but when you consider what the potential ROI is on PPC compared to other forms of advertising, it ends up paying for itself pretty quickly, so long as you're operating in an industry where the revenue per service or per ticket is sufficient enough to balance out the cost per click on average or the cost per conversion. And I put a little note in here just to kind of put it in perspective. Lowe's, for example, they spend about $60 million on Google Ads alone each year. So just to kind of put that in perspective of how much can actually go into this, it sounds extremely high, and there's a little bit of sticker shock to it. But once you realize what the return can be, it ends up being extremely worth it. So again, just as a quick stat, on average, business will double its investment in Google Ads. To me, that's a pretty conservative number based on what I see with clients and how long I've been working in this industry. I actually see quite a bit bigger return on that. Again, this is just an overall average, so each industry is a little different. But just something to keep in mind when you're looking at your budgets. So this is a quick calculator. These numbers can obviously be changed, but you can basically build one of these out to get an idea of how much you should be spending depending on what your goals are. So you'll know for your business, how many leads that you need to make or that you need to garner in a week or a month. And then based on how your campaigns are running, you can kind of figure up what your average cost per conversion is going to be, your conversion rate. I picked some averages here. We see typically around a 7% conversion rate, depending on the campaign, depending on the industry. That can be higher or lower, but this is kind of in the middle. Average cost per click. Again, this varies from region, but in basement waterproofing home services, it's right around that $9 mark. Again, in certain areas, we see it higher, maybe up $12, $13, $14. Again, in some areas, it's lower than that. It just kind of depends, and you can always build out a sheet like this so that you can play with it. What I do want to point out here is that there is a limit to your budget. So we kind of hear two different approaches sometimes. Some businesses want to be extremely conservative and say, well, I'm not sure how it's going to go. I don't know if I want to put a whole lot of money into it right off the bat, so we're going to go with a low budget. While that's understandable, you do need to understand that there's a certain ante for the table, if you will. There's a certain table stakes to even be competitive. If you're restricting your budget too much, you're not going to be able to show your ads enough as far as your frequency goes. You might go through all of your daily budget in the first 2 hours, or you might not be able to bid high enough to even be in those top positions. And it doesn't always require that you're number one, but you should at least be in the top search results for those ads that show above organic results. So you do need a big enough budget to at least have a seat at the table to stay competitive. Otherwise, you will spend budget, but it's not going to be working efficiently, and that's almost a surefire way to not have a successful experiment with this if you don't give it enough budget to actually breathe. Now, the other end of that is you can throw money at it all day long, but if it's not being managed properly, number one, Google's going to charge you a premium on those clicks, because it's, like I said earlier, you're balancing between what you're willing to bid and how well your campaigns are being run and how relevant your ad copy is, and if you're following best practices and good strategy. So if that's not being met, then you're going to end up paying a higher cost per click. Also, just because you set your budgets higher does not necessarily mean Google's always going to spend it, because you are going to be restricted by your service area, the number of services you offer. So for example, if you had a $15,000 a month budget, but you're only running ads in a 5-mile radius for one very niche service, this is an extreme example, there's just not going to be enough search activity on those search terms to actually spend that budget. And if you are in a position where you want to increase your number of leads, you can run into a situation where putting more money into it isn't necessarily always going to result in more leads or better performance. Sometimes it does come down to other factors. So it's kind of a balancing act. And the reason I point this out is to make sure that you're conscientious of that if you're looking to get into pay-per-click for the first time, or if you're looking to evaluate your current pay-per-click activities. One thing that I hear a lot is, okay, well, I don't necessarily want to do this because I can't compete with Amazon, or I can't compete with the big guys, or whatever it might be. Budget's not always everything. You have to have enough to play the game, but just don't get discouraged by the fact that your competitor might have a bigger budget. If you can outmanage them, you're certainly still going to see good results, and we see that quite a bit. The clients that we work with are not necessarily the huge chains or franchises that have these massive budgets to put into their pay-per-click, but our clients still do great because it comes down to the management and smart budgeting. Which is kind of what we're going to talk about now. I won't go too far into the weeds with this, but a few best practices for understanding the management of your ads, whether it's something that you're doing yourself or someone else is doing and you have to review the performance. Know what your conversions are. Understand your metrics, what you're actually looking at. Like I said before, what we typically consider a conversion is something that is a hard connection between the consumer and the business. So this is usually going to be a phone call or a form fill in terms of service-based businesses. So when you're looking at your reporting on your advertising, understand what quote-unquote conversion really means and dig into those. How many phone calls are you getting as a result of the ads? How many form fills are you getting? Are those the only conversions being tracked? Are they being tracked properly? Are there other things that are coming through registering as conversions? Sometimes Google will put their own what they might call smart conversions on your campaigns, or if you log into Google Analytics, they've got smart goals now, and sometimes those are based on like time on page or other interactions on the site that are not really a hard conversion. So understand what you're looking at when you're looking at your conversions and how many you're getting, and by extension, what your cost per conversion is. Just know that when you're monitoring your metrics. Another thing to keep an eye out: when and where are your conversions happening? Are they happening within a service area that's relevant to the business? Are you getting a lot of traffic from, say, a state or a city that you don't actually do business in? That's wasted spend if you are. When are the conversions happening? Time of day, time of the week. Knowing this helps you understand if you want to put more focus on those times and days of the week, if they're more profitable, or if they are a vampire on your budget and they never seem to convert, then you might want to consider some bid adjustments on those days or some custom scheduling to where you don't run on those days or those times a day. So again, this is just getting a picture of how people are interacting with the ads and what's most profitable. So there's a few basic ideas for optimization. We kind of alluded to this. Know what your KPIs are and use those to kind of steer the ship. Know what you're willing to pay, how many conversions you need, and what kind of cost per conversion you're willing to accept. This is going to help you know what you're looking for within the advertising campaigns to know where you need to make adjustments. So if your conversion rate is too low or your cost per conversion is too high, then you'll know that those campaigns need a little attention. There's some other KPIs that you can use to dig in a little bit more. These are slightly more advanced, but nothing that's extremely difficult to wrap your head around. Your audience and demographic level KPIs. So which age groups convert the best? Which types of audiences convert the best in terms of what their digital activity looks like for the types of services that they're in the market for? Is there any correlation between where the audience is living or what their location is, These are all metrics that you can dig into and help you better optimize your ads. And then you can look at your impression share, your top of page rate. These are basically how often your ads are showing up and where they're showing up on the page. You want to know that in a given moment or a given week or a given time period that you're evaluating your metrics, that you are showing your ads when you should be. That relates directly more towards impression share, and then your top of page rate has to do with, okay, of the amount of times that your ad showed, how many times did they actually show towards the top of the page? And by and large, you're going to see higher conversion rates when your ads are being placed at the top of the page than lower on the page. Budget pacing, this is a very tricky thing. When you are determining a daily budget, it's based on what your monthly budget is. So for example, if you have a $3,000 a month daily budget and you want to run all 30 days, then you've got $100 a day to spend. Google isn't necessarily always going to spend that amount daily. The way that Google does their calculation is they're going to say, okay, on average, I need to spend $100 a day. That means that a slow day might only spend $50, which means now they have $150 to spend the next day. It's all based on a 30-day period to make sure that it evens out at the end of the month. It doesn't necessarily mean that Google's always going to spend the budget, and it doesn't necessarily mean that it's not going to go overboard sometimes. So you need to watch these things on a daily, weekly, bi-weekly basis to understand if you're spending your budget how it should be spent, or if you need to maybe rein in some of the daily budgets or give them more daily budget to make sure that you're actually spending what you had allotted for the month. Budget pacing can be a kind of a tricky thing, but there's some methods out there that make it a lot easier. I won't have time to get into them in this presentation, but again, you can always reach out. We can talk through some of that. So a little bit about Genesis, just to kind of tie this all together here. 2019, of the leads that we generated for our home service clients, about 3,300 of those were paid leads. Now, some quick calculations here. And this is to put it in perspective of what the ROI can be on paid ads. If we assume an average close rate of 30%, and again, this is based on close rates that we hear from clients, that we've seen with partners, that's right around average. Some companies do a better job, others worse, but we'll say a 30% closing ratio. So if you pulled in 10 leads, then we're saying that 3 of those might actually result in in setting the appointment. That's what we're talking about with close ratio. And then average cost per sale, again, with the types of clients we work with in foundations and crawl spaces and basements, right around $5,500. Some clients it's a little higher than that, some lower depending on the services, but right around $5,500 is pretty normal. If you take those metrics and put them together and calculate out what that amounts to as far as the total sales, you're right at about $5.5 million, just under it. So $5.5 million in revenue, just based on paid advertising for 2019 for these clients. Now, what that translates into, here's our total spent across all the accounts. So this is to give you an idea of what your spend is versus the total sales. This is going to translate into the ROI calculations and return on ad spend. Now, as a percent of the total sales, 5% of that ended up being allotted to Google, which is right around where we would recommend to stay. Staying under 10% is really optimal. It can be a little bit higher, depending on the situation, but generally we try to keep that ad spend under 5% of total revenue. So that when you take that ad spend out, that net becomes about 5.1 million and about a 1,900% return on investment, which is doing pretty good as far as advertising formats go. Return on ad spend, this is a little slightly different calculation, but it's basically saying for every revenue dollar that you made, how much was spent on advertising. 20 to 1, it's doing pretty well. So like I said, if you have any questions after this, you can always reach out to us. I can be reached at srnet@genesismarketinggroup.com. You can always reach out to Anthony Brown as well, or Mike Stiers. We look forward to hearing from you, and hopefully you can walk away from this with little bit better knowledge on PPC. Thank you.